Once again to an India Today, Business Today special coming to you from the Davos brainstorm. The World Economic Forum meetings have begun in this Swiss hill town, and we're trying to bring together some of the best thought leaders, opinion makers and newsmakers to talk about the world around us at a time when the world is in rapid transition and disruption. And we want to examine closely how this changing world is affecting key areas of business as well. Joining us now is another very special guest, best described as a brand guru, a marketing genius.
In his own mind.
Sir Martin Sorrell, Executive Chairman, S4Capital, the man who founded and led WPP into the world's largest advertising group.
Yeah.
Great to have you with us here. Let's talk about brand building in this disruptive world around us. And I want to look at two brands who Indian viewers are interested in, brand Trump and brand Narendra Modi. I want you for a moment, put on your advertising branding hat and tell us how you perceive brand Trump, his strengths and weaknesses, brand Modi, his strength and weaknesses.
Wow, that's an easy
question. I mean, here's India on a roll. All these World Bank estimates. India will be the fastest growing, was the fastest growing economy last year, will be this year, and will be next year, according to the World Bank, which must be right. Run by an Indian, if I remember rightly.
That's right.
Okay.
So,
brand Trump is tactical. It's what we would call mid-funnel or lower funnel. It's about performance in the short term, I think. Highly disruptive. Brand Modi is more strategic, I think. Donald Trump is about the art of the deal. It's interesting. Every speech he makes, at some point in it, virtually invariably, there's some reference to doing a deal. Having cards, my cards are bigger than your cards or better than your cards. So I think Trump is very tactical, very deal orientated, very short term. Maybe a function, I just came from a discussion, an impromptu discussion with several people here, and Davos hasn't really started, it starts this evening. Pretty gloomy discussion where the world has gone very short term. Private equity companies are short term, venture capital companies are short term, they want to know how they exit before they enter. Private equity lasts, holding period 5 years maximum. Listed company, quarterly earnings. Donald Trump says get rid of quarterly earnings. I think he's right on that. So I think Donald is very much for the deal, for the tactics, for disruption. Here we are at Davos, and all we're talking about is Greenland and Trump. And he's the center of attention, which is very much his objective. Modi is much more long term. He's been at it for long term. I mean, he can carry on for even longer. He doesn't have 2-term limitation. So he's taken a much more long-term view, and I'm more comfortable with brand Modi to your question than I am with brand Trump, because I think brand Trump used the words at the beginning of this era of transition and disruption. With Trump, it's more disruption than transition. I think with Modi, it's probably about transition, disruption. I mean, India is playing both ends off against the middle, if I can put it that way, which I think is the right thing to do. And Greenland now top of the agenda for the EU leaders. What are they going to do? Are they going to trade Greenland for peace and lower tariffs in America, or are they going to be, as a point of principle, say, no go? I think, by the way, we lost that point of principle on Ukraine. When we all decided not to go full throttle on Ukraine, I think the cat was out of the bag, or the toothpaste was out of the tube. I think we lost the moral position on that. Now it's a slippery slope. What do you do on Greenland? I mean, I was with the group yesterday of more Asian leaders, and the suggestion was, you had to buy peace with America by surrendering Greenland.
Communication strategies in this disruptive transactional world, a world that you rightly described, driven by short-termism, where also today's news is almost tomorrow's history. how do you shape communication strategies effectively? How do businesses, we spoke about the politicians, but how do businesses, especially legacy businesses versus the new age businesses, how do they shape their strategies in this short-termism?
Well, it's very easy to say.
But I'll give you sort of three areas where I think it's really absolutely fundamental. The first is the obvious one. In this world of disruption or transition or both, agility is key. So, and every CEO, I think it's truer in India with, the Indian, if I can call them oligarchs or the entrepreneurs, that they are so good and they are so fresh and so modern. Many of them are, they're multi-generational, but many of them are first-generational. So they haven't had the, they're not legacy companies that have to shift. So agility comes naturally to them. And now they're being agile, not just on an Indian stage and not just on a regional stage, but on a global one. So that's one thing. The second thing is companies have to exert more influence on their marketing. They have to take back control. After 2008, the tendency was, CFOs were in control of companies. Let's move stuff out to outsource to suppliers, to consultants or agents or whatever. In a digital world of highly personalized communication, you have to bring it in. And then allied to that, the first thing is that client data becomes absolutely critical. So knowing your customer inside out and having the data, which you mix with the signals from the platforms, from Google, from Amazon, from Meta, from Alibaba, Tencent, and TikTok, that's absolutely critical. So the organization has to change. And AI, by the way, flattens the organization because it makes information much more available to everybody. So, my favorite example is Jensen Huang has 51 reports. I've seen a book which says he now has 60 direct reports. That would be anathema. Went to McKinsey and asked them what's the ideal management span. They would say 12 or 13 people. So the nature of organization getting flatter, information is being disseminated faster, and agility and using that data in an agile way and taking back control is really important. So those are the sorts of things that you have to do. The problem is, I actually think it sort of goes a bit deeper than that. In the business community, it's not only that people are short-term, it's that people are going for the quick hit. So I had a conversation last night, interesting, I won't say who it was, but his son had left university, had actually applied for a Peter Thiel fellowship. And the point of the fellowship with Peter Thiel was to fund you to leave university, not complete your degree, and start a business. And this guy had started a venture fund, been very successful, and has built up a successful portfolio, but had done a lot of the, late 20s, early 30s, had made a lot of entries and exits. So building a business over the long term has been replaced, in my view, by much more agility and much more volatility. So maybe it's a sign of the times. Maybe the pace of geographical and technological change is so great that building business for the long term is for a mug's game.
So
Where does that leave the legacy brands, for example? Legacy media companies that have been built on tradition, on certain values.
in very tough shape. So look at what's happening
With WBD, it flattened. It's back at $7 a share. It's now $28, $29, $30 a share, and you've got people fighting over it. Netflix, to some inexplicably, from the new media wanting to get into the old media, more logical Paramount going for it. If you have two studios making one, makes sense. Omnicom and IPG are merging or have merged in the advertising space. That's not about growth. Mm-hmm. That's not about enhancing services for clients. It's about reducing capacity and making it more difficult for clients to find agencies to go and use, and cutting employment from 127,500 to 104,000. Mm-hmm. So I think the world as a whole, in a way, going back to your first question, in a way the world has moved away from the long-term brand building to the short-term execution. And the interesting thing about the question that you posed is maybe Trump is more representative of what's going on in the world now, and maybe that's part of his appeal, than a longer term approach.
So where does that leave
advertisers and marketeers and their traditional ways of advertising and marketing? Because I read statements from you in the past, in the recent past, where you said, for example, PR is over. You know, the age of the old style.
The point I was making
They're like sensitive flowers.
Yeah, they got
extremely sensitive.
yeah, but there's
Ridiculous. I mean, the point being made was you can't separate PR from marketing. Actually, PR is part of marketing. And but on that particular thing, it was a BBC Radio 4 program. I was on it with the woman who represented the PR association. Of course, she's going to argue that PR is different because she's paid for by PR agencies to make PR great again, right? But the fundamental fact is that PR, I don't like the phrase. It's about marketing. It's part of marketing. Influencers, digital marketing, social marketing, using, Reels, using Instagram, using YouTube. It's all morphed into marketing as a whole, and PR is a part of marketing. PR sums up the idea of journalists in dirty Macs and cigarettes in a pub in Fleet Street with pints of beer. It's not about that anymore, because an interesting thing, PR agencies hire creative directors, they have media directors, they have storytellers. It's all morphed. The point of that statement was it's morphed into one. To your question, the WBD Paramount deal, the difficulties that Disney had when Bob Iger left for the first time and had to come back and deal with it. When Sherry Redstone sold her father's company, Sumner Redstone's company, to David Ellison and to Larry Ellison. These are all emblematic of the pressures that traditional Comcast coming together, dissembling. All these are emblematic of the pressure that the traditional, the industry is about $1 trillion industry. It was in 24. It's 1.1 trillion in 25, about 1.2 in 26. 700 billion was digital in 24. It's probably 800 billion last year, 900 billion this year. That is growing at 10, 15 or 20%. The 300 million in traditional, free-to-air TV and traditional radio, traditional outdoor, is declining. It's either stable if you have live sport or declining if you don't. It declined in 24. It declined in 25. It will decline in 26. And the reason is this massive shift to digital marketing. Google is 250 billion and more of a rising of revenue. Meta is 150 billion. Amazon is 60. Alibaba, Tencent, we don't really know the numbers, and put mainland China to one side. TikTok outside China is 40 billion. Those four platforms are 500 billion, or were in 24, out of $1 trillion. Half the market, and of digital, 5/7, 70%. That's where the money is going.
The money
is going, therefore, into digital marketing. But there are those who feel that the art of the story, the art of storytelling, the art of communication, therefore, as we knew it for years, is also in a way either eroding or is losing out. I mean, how do I tell an effective story about a brand in a 90-second reel, where with attention spans also as low as they are?
Well, it's not 90.
It can be
30 seconds.
It could be even less.
Or 10 seconds.
No, I remember there was Facebook had a piece of data in Italy which said that women in particular were going online and just looking for 2 or 3 seconds, and we created 2 or 3 second ads, and that anathema to long-term brand builders. Well, the fact is that we have to come up with even more creative ways of trying to do it. If we're trying to personalize at scale, we're using all this first-party data and the signals from the platforms to create personalized communications to appeal to you or me. How do we get the story and the impact of that creative and that sound, that visual, that film, that picture, and the sound to have an impact? It's going to be more and more difficult. And in a world of AI, when you have these tools that level the playing field, how are you going to introduce the real? And the conventional answer to that, or the conventional wisdom, is that the human being will be the differentiator. We'll all be using these tools, and it will still be the human spark of creativity that changes. I'm not so sure of that. We'll have to see how I'm in the Eric Schmidt camp.
Now, are you an AI?
AI skeptic, or are you
I'm
an
not skeptic. It's inevitable.
It's going to go that way. But I sort of go along with Eric that there's a TikTok film that he did where he said it's going to take 3 or 4 years for machines to become more intelligent than people. And he said at that stage we should pull the plug. And I think there is something in that. I think that what we're going to really ultimately wrestle with is there are going to be machines that are more powerful than people. This is anathema to people in my industry.
No, also,
it is anathema to the old creative people within your industry, advertising, and I meet ad makers who like to believe that the creativity of the human being cannot be matched by a machine. There are others who say, well, sorry, that it's already been taken over by AI and the machine.
I'd like
It to be the case. I like the romantic notion to continue to exist. I have my doubts as to whether, I think that we're on the cusp of using quantum computing, which will expand the capacity of these machines to an extraordinary degree. I mean, there will be the good stuff. I mean, yesterday we were talking about the impact of AI in the healthcare industry, making us live longer, God forbid, but live longer and in this disruptive world, all to the good. But there are going to be some really tough things to deal with. And I think this question about whether a machine will ultimately become more, some of the really disturbing stuff is the way that the machines already find ways around protocols. In AI and AGI, these machines have found ways. You put in strict rules, protocols to prevent them from doing things, and after a period of time, they find ways around them, much to our chagrin. So it's not going to be easy, but there are huge benefits in this highly disruptive world. In a world where we have to deal with US-China relationships or lack of them, Russia and Ukraine, and Vladimir Putin's imperial ambitions, Iran and their imperial ambitions as well. In that world where we have these intractable problems, AI, two things are going to be important. Firstly, you have to choose, this is where India scores, you have to choose your markets very carefully. So people will be naturally drawn to expansion in India because the economy is expanding at 6 or 7%. That's one thing. The second thing is that in a world where growth is going to be tempered, inflation pretty stubborn, and interest rates higher than we're used to, efficiency, driven by AI, by blockchain, by quantum, whatever, is going to become super important. So those two things, the geographical bucket, I'm very bullish on India, and very bullish, coming back to where we started the conversation, on brand Modi, because India is the future, and it's been the future for a number of years, but now the chickens are coming home to roost.
India, not China.
Because China remains the dragon in the room, if you want to call it
The
that.
answer is both,
But China, if you're big in China, meaning if 15% of your sales come from China, which you should do, they're 18 trillion out of 106 trillion, so let's call it 20%. Do you want to go bigger, given the Taiwan risk? I don't think China will invade Taiwan, but I think they will slowly put pressure on Taiwan and absorb Taiwan. It's existential from a President Xi point of view, and he'll want to do it in his political lifetime, I think. If you're worried about that, and it's increased risk, you go to India. India is the flip to that. The one thing that troubles me about India is that given what's going on, Donald Trump wants to move manufacturing back to India, to the US. In a way, he's going to achieve it, but with AI, it hollows out the bottom of the pyramid. So those jobs that were shipped to India, to the TCSs and Wipros or whatever, they're going to migrate back, but they're going to be replaced by robots, not by people. So the one thing that I sort of worry about a little bit from an Indian point of view is it's had its advantage was its technological labour and cheaper technological labour. Whether that trade will evaporate over time, we don't know. But at the moment, I think it benefits in a way from the China thing. One of them I wanted to say about China. I think the real issue is America's refusal to accept it's a G2 world. My view, it is a G2 world, and you have to accept that China is a power and will be the second greatest power, or maybe even the most important power from an economic point of view, ultimately, in terms of GDP. We have to accept that. And I think it's America's unwillingness to accept. I mean, here we are at Davos. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but it's a very American-dominated conference. Larry Fink, President Trump, biggest delegation here, USA House. You know, it's become a focal point for American attention, which is really interesting, by the way.
It is, and
It reflects how geopolitics has shifted, particularly in the last 12 months. But away from geopolitics, just in conclusion, to the world you've known best of advertising, if there were young advertisers watching this program, young Indian advertisers in particular, what would be the one or two things you'd tell them as they start building their careers in the world of advertising and marketing?
Well,
6 months ago or 9 months ago, you learn code. You don't have to learn code anymore because AI can do it for you. But I would say look, it's really fundamental. Learn technology. Be technologically proficient. Treat it as though it was a language. Absolutely critical. I would say learn Chinese. You don't have to learn Chinese because you've got AI as well. And I would actually say learn Spanish, because maybe I'm biased, but I think this is where I think Trump is also right. I mean, I think he's right in his intuition about Greenland being important, and also important that South America, not so much Venezuela maybe, that's important, but Mexico, Colombia, Argentina and Brazil. So I would say those three things. Technology, super important. Chinese, super important. And also, I think, Spanish.
okay.
Sir Martin Sorrell, as always, you have a unique way of actually bringing the conversation from geopolitics through advertising into branding. If there was one piece of advice, therefore, that you'd give where we started off, brand Modi and brand Trump, purely from, again, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give brand Modi to enhance his brand, and what would be the one piece of advice you'd give brand Trump to enhance his brand?
I like President.
To be a bit more strategic, but what do I know? He's much more successful. So I'd like him to be more strategic. Maybe President Modi can be more tactical. Prime Minister Modi can be more tactical. Maybe they can learn from one another in a way. I mean, I don't think everything is about the art of the deal, or owning real estate or whatever. So I think it's much less tactical. I think you have to take the long-term view. Modi, I think, is really, really interesting. I think he's done a tremendous job, and I don't think there's much advice that he needs, but maybe the tactics. When I was in Mumbai just before Christmas, picked up a little bit of criticism on the tactics, maybe a little bit too disengaged from the US, perhaps, but I think that in the fullest time, if I was him, I'd be right in the middle, both ends against the middle, like the Saudis. My biggest defense partner is the US. My biggest trade partner is China. It's not a bad position to be in.
So Martin,
Sorrell, pleasure having you here in Davos. Sir Martin Sorrell giving us his sense of the way he sees the world of advertising, AI, and indeed the geopolitical turbulent world around us. Thanks for watching. Rajdeep Sardesai in Davos.